Ketogenic diet advocates love to use Innuits in their traditional diet as an example of healthy ketogenic dieting. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, it'd be greatly appreciated. If you're not following or subscribed, please do so. And if you would be kind enough to drop me a comment down below, I would also greatly appreciate that. Thank you so much. Let's get over to the topic. Here's the thing. Keto people love to use this, and they love to do this for the purpose of saying, hey, our diet's great. But the problem is the Inuits were not healthy. And if you go back and you look at the early sources, Western scientists and explorers, and they started interacting with them, they noted, and you go back and look at the stuff hundreds of years ago, they described them as rotund. They were portly. They were overweight. They were fat. Okay? So they were fat. This is absolutely a problem. Okay? This is absolutely a problem. And so you see that right up front. And keeping in mind, this is like the only culture on earth that really had access to large amounts of saturated fat, would be the Inuits, the Eskimos. That's what we're talking about. And so you have that. And the other thing that you have to look at, they're like, well, they were free of heart disease, but they weren't. Now, keep in mind, their average life expectancy was 55, and so you would expect most, indigenous native cultures are not going to have too much of that. We don't start seeing real heart attacks below, age 50 until you get to, like Western American diets, right? So it's like, so people would say, well, maybe you wouldn't see it because of the age, blah, 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 right? But that's not true. The fact that they say that they had no cardiovascular disease is a complete, absolute fabrication, provably false. How do we know it's provably false? We found mummified remains of them. We found mummies of them numerous times, okay, going back hundreds of years, like 400 or 500-year-old mummies, meaning they had access to no modern diets, only the traditional diet, right? What's one of the things they consistently find? What is one thing that biologists and anthropologists repeatedly, over and over and over, note? And people who go research this can be like, uh-oh. They all have atherosclerosis. Every one of them, including younger ones. We're talking like in their 20s. So every time they find mummies of them and they examine it and look for it, they find that younger Inuits, the mummified remains, they all have very measurable and relatively serious atherosclerosis. In spite of an active lifestyle, okay, in spite of even getting access to marine stuff that should help offset some of that, they all of them have atherosclerosis. So in other words, if we go off the data we have, we're finding there remains of them on their traditional diet showing cardiovascular disease still in the mummified remains. Most of them, unless maybe we have a selection bias there, I don't know, but it would appear based upon that it was extremely prevalent for them to have cardiovascular disease and atherosclerosis, very measurable amounts of it forming. Well, that means they weren't metabolically healthy. And if they're saying they have no cardiovascular disease, but we keep finding the remains and we can find measurable evidence, tangible measurable evidence that it was extremely prevalent for them to have cardiovascular disease, then guess what? They had it. This is exactly what we would expect. So when people say, well, the models are wrong about the high saturated fat diet, except that your little example, the Inuits, prove it. They proved the model. They had atherosclerosis. Okay? They literally confirm what the modern cardiologists are saying about saturated fat intake, LDL, and atherosclerosis. They also literally prove that these keto-type diets are not associated with long-term good health outcomes. Okay? If they try to use the Inuits as a positive example, but the problem, they're an example of why it's bad. And they try to spin it that way, and they have to because it's really the only native population they have anywhere in the world following a diet that would be a ketogenic type diet, right? The only one following it. They had a short life expectancy. They seem to have all had atherosclerosis. And here's the thing, and a lot of times they say, oh, the modern diet messed them up, but it really didn't. In fact, I've seen some experts suggest that even the Western Americanized diet in some cases seems to have improved their health or life expectancy. I've heard someone suggest that, a doctor somewhere, and I don't know if it's true, but he kind of pointed out, he goes, man, how bad would their diet have to be that they improved on it? Or at least didn't get worse. And again, I don't have evidence of that one. It was just something I saw a doctor write, an MD, who discusses these things. I haven't verified that myself. But it was an interesting point. What if he is right? They have a longer lifespan and less disease. Because their metabolic health was horrible. And that's their gold standard. And on top of it, here's one of the things they noted too. People think they forget. Like, well, they followed this type of diet. They developed a gene to make them resistant to ketosis. Oh my God, so let that one sink in. That doesn't bode well either. So you're telling me the only diet, the only traditional culture that had access to the foods to do a ketogenic diet, because we don't have fatty meat anywhere else in the world outside the Arctic Circle, right? Wild game is really, really lean. So only culture that followed it, the only one that's ever been on a diet that would be considered close to ketogenic, literally developed a gene to be resistant to going into ketosis. Well, stop and think about that for a minute. No, think about that. What does that mean? They developed the gene and it spread through the whole group. It means it was helped them survive, meaning it improved survival, or else they wouldn't have all developed it. So that means long-term exposure of a ketogenic diet generation after generation after generation, the only ones who survived it are the ones who had the most highest survival rate, or the ones who were resistant to going into ketosis. What then does that tell us about a long-term ketogenic state? In order to survive it over dozens of generations, you have to be resistant to it, or you die out and don't pass your genes on? Again, this does not help their argument. If anything, the existence of the Innuits and their condition should be closing the book on this. It should be, yep, this is a problem. This shows your diet is bad. An ultra high saturated fat, low carbohydrate diet will kill you. If we use the Innuits as an example.